I'm joined now by Congressman Jamie Raskin. Thanks so much for taking the time.
I'm psyched to be with you, Brian.
So, Congressman, in the last 24 hours, we of course saw this assault and attempted arrest of Senator Padilla. This comes in the aftermath of Donald Trump's goons basically arresting the governor of Newark. We've had Democratic lawmakers, Democratic staffers, Jerry Nadler's staffer in New York. And so this has become a recurring theme. We have a judge in Wisconsin at the same time that we're now seeing Donald Trump prepare for a military birthday parade in Washington, D.C. And so we have a lot of different elements of what an autocratic leader would do. And so how are you thinking about this moment as you see all of these different instances that would normally represent an autocracy, an authoritarian leader, kind of collide at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, these are all of the certain clues of an authoritarian regime in the making. So they arrest a sitting state court judge in Wisconsin. They have indicted my colleague LaMonica McGyver from New Jersey for felony offenses that could total 17 years in prison for going to a scheduled visit to an ICE facility and then
Yeah.
just being in the crowd where they arrested the mayor. They had to drop those charges. They barged into Jerry Nadler's office and traumatized a 24-year-old staff assistant who was in tears as they handcuffed her for no reason at all. And then yesterday, they threw to the ground United States Senator, Senator Padilla from California, for asking a question, for posing a question in a federal building where his office is, of a cabinet official. And that's on top of sending the Marines to the United States, to California, and federalizing the National Guard there, although that has been reversed by Judge Breyer in the United States District Court, dealing the 194th setback to Trump in court in terms of preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders. But the path is clear. We're on the path towards straight up authoritarianism.
I mean, we often hear about the creep toward autocracy. I'm pretty certain that if we saw any of these things happening in aggregate or even in isolation in any other country, we wouldn't hesitate for a second to call it what it is, which is autocracy or dictatorship. And so do you think trying to take an objective view of this, that this has already arrived? It's not like we're waiting for a constitutional crisis in the US. We are in the midst of one in the United States. And to that point, then, I know people are going to be looking at this and they're going to be worried about whether there's even a way to come back from this. And so what would you say to those folks?
Well, I would say, yeah, the struggle and the crisis is here. The Constitution has been under attack now for a long time by these
Yeah.
people, and they are getting more brazen in deploying state power to try to crush dissent. On the other hand, everywhere I go in the country, I'm seeing people more and more resolved and determined to fight back. And I'm not just talking about people in the streets, I'm talking about governors and mayors and elected officials and judges who are standing up for the Constitution and the rule of law.
What do you make of the fact that, while we were watching Donald Trump deploy the National Guard, federalize the National Guard, deploy the U.S. Marines into Los Angeles, that so many folks in his party, so many of your Republican colleagues would come forward and defend this? And this is in spite of their, don't tread on me bona fides. These are the people who are supposed to be for small government, and yet now figuring out a way to do apologia for somebody who's literally federalizing American troops against American citizens.
When they're out of power, MAGA will use violence against the government to have their way. When they're in power, they will use violence against the people to have their way. So it's insurrection when they're out, it's repression when they're in. Violence is the common denominator there. And, I suppose we've seen remarkable technological advancements since the time of King George and the American Revolution, but morally, psychologically, emotionally, we're still the exact same species that we were. And,
Yeah.
even during the American Revolution, I'm reading an interesting book about this now, called The First Civil War. Half of the people were still on the side of King George and the Empire, and they're just saying, you can't beat the alpha dog. You can't beat the greatest military empire that's ever existed. You can't separate church and state. You can't overthrow the lords and the tyrants. And for all of human history, people have lived under somebody like King George or Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin. But half of the people said, let's pledge to ourselves, you know, our fortunes, our lives, our sacred honor to build something different, democratic self-government protecting the rights and freedoms of the people.
Mike Johnson was asked for his reaction to the fact that Trump's goons jumped on, assaulted, and detained and attempted to arrest Senator Padilla. And instead of defending the autonomy of his own branch of government that he leads as the Speaker of the House, he called for Senator Padilla to be censured. And so is there any hope from what you've seen from the Mike Johnsons of the world and his Republican colleagues, that any of these people are going to stand up for the autonomy of their own co-equal branch of government?
Well, one can hope against hope that at some point they will do it, but I think that Mike Johnson, who I considered a decent guy and a cut above most of the MAGA people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, has basically weakened his critical thinking faculties. He has weakened his mind with theocracy, and theocracy is now just merging with autocracy. And I don't think he has any means of intellectual self-defense against Donald Trump anymore. So here you have a guy who, strikes the pose of a theocrat. I mean, and it's all about religiosity and piousness.
Yeah.
And he's embraced the most vice-ridden, crime-ridden, corruption-ridden administration in American history, and a president who has been charged multiple times with sexual assault. He's been adjudicated a sexual assailant in the state of New York. He has, openly betrayed his wives. And he's looting the government and collecting unconstitutional foreign emoluments from all over the world. So, I don't know what to say about the people who have done that. Our strategy for victories does not count on someone like Mike Johnson defecting to the side of democracy and freedom.
I want to move over to the bill that is right now working its way through the Senate. Eventually, it's going to come back to you guys in the House because there's not going to be an agreement on the exact verbiage of that bill that the House sent over. But, this is the reconciliation bill. One issue is that Marjorie Taylor Greene had come out and found some provision in the bill that she didn't, that she had admitted she didn't read. And so we've seen numerous instances where Republican members of the House have come out and said, actually, this needs to be changed. This is some element of the bill that I don't agree with that I nonetheless voted for because I didn't bother reading. And so what's your reaction to these folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene who have buyer's remorse on the same bill that they were so eager to ram through?
Well, of course she didn't read it. They don't read the bills. They do exactly what the leadership tells them to do, and they do exactly what Donald Trump tells them to do. When she said she didn't read it and that's why she wants to oppose it now, what she really means is, well, of course she didn't read it, but now she's come under extreme right-wing pressure from some quarters saying that provision's indigestible, and that provision prevents the state and local governments from regulating artificial intelligence for the next 10 years. So I'm with her in opposing it, and I voted against the bill. And I read the bill and I voted against it. So I think what's going to happen is they will have to pluck certain provisions out that different factions within the GOP are opposing. Remember, they've got this tiny margin, which gives us a lot of room to maneuver to turn up the heat on particular provisions. The one which purports to obliterate courts' power to impose criminal and civil contempt sanctions is a very similar one. I mean, that's unconstitutional. It's also outside of the so-called Byrd rule, meaning it's not a fiscal provision. It doesn't relate to the budget, and so it shouldn't be considered anyway. But if you get to the substance of it, it's totally unconstitutional because a court must, of course, have the right to impose coercive sanctions against a party who's lost the case, who refuses to comply with the court order. If not, then the court is not succeeding in effectuating a remedy. And like the Supreme Court said in Marbury versus Madison, if there's no remedy, there's no right.
What do you make of the fact that, we've been talking about this bill for a couple of months now, and it's more and more important to continue discussing it as it comes to a head in the Senate? There was the date that was thrown out was the 4th of July. They wanted to actually get this thing signed into law so that they didn't have to deal with it after the 4th. We'll see if that remains to be true, but the whole country was paying attention to this bill and the fact that it would kick 14 million people off of their health care, that it would strip food assistance to the tune of $300 billion, that it would explode the deficit to the tune of trillions of dollars. And then suddenly, in one fell swoop, Donald Trump decides to send the U.S. military into Los Angeles so that we weren't able to talk about that. And so can I have your reaction to the fact that as a distraction against a bill that Republicans are purposefully pushing forward, a bill that would, again, strip all of these essential lifelines for the American people, the shiny object Donald Trump landed on was to send the U.S. military into an American city illegally, as we would come to find out, but so that it could spark a conflict against the people of Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, immigration is clearly a weapon of mass distraction. We know that because we had that bipartisan border deal all negotiated and wrapped up and ready to go, and one person blew it up, Donald Trump, because he was in search not of an immigration solution or even just a border solution. He's in search of a border crisis so he can continue to propound demagogic, nativistic appeals. And but that tactic may be exhausting itself for him. I had missed this, but I saw on Lawrence O'Donnell last night an extraordinary series of statements by Donald Trump where he was just saying, well, something to the effect of there's lots of people who are working in agriculture on the farms who may not have everything just the right way. They might not have all their papers in order, but those big farms need them. Obviously, some agriculture interests got in touch with him, the kind of people whose word he respects. And he basically said, we can't do this, which is precisely what people have been saying for months and for years, which is,
Right.
Let's figure out a realistic, tangible plan that can bring the country together. But he basically gave the game away and said, no, he's not going to be doing that. And the reason why the society's in an uproar about what's going on is there are simply not enough criminals for them to be going after. That's the low-hanging fruit. They did that at the beginning. Now they're, taking away teenage kids. In my district, they're going after high school students. Who are they hurting? They said they were going to go after criminals. Now they're going, right in the heart of people's communities. I saw one discussion about a community in Kansas, which has rallied around a very popular woman who's a waitress in the local, diner in this small town, who doesn't have her papers in order. And the whole town is like screaming and marching and saying, bring her back, bring her back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to that exact point of marching and screaming, there is the No King's Day protest this weekend. Are you going to be attending, and what message do you have for folks who may be on the fence as to whether it's worth it to attend this weekend?
Oh, it is worth it. Every single body, every single person counts here. The whole world is watching. Donald Trump is staging his birthday military extravaganza to the tune of $50 million with military tanks and planes streaking overhead. We can absolutely dwarf the number of people who are going to be at that with the people across the country. That's going to be a very important statement. But every time that we march and we rally and we manifest, we're showing that we're not afraid of this authoritarianism. And it's a great feeling. If you haven't gone, you got to go and bring your family and bring your friends. And there will be great chants, great speakers. But so far, the highlight has been the signs. And you're going to see some unbelievable signs out there.
Well, I'm looking forward to being out there this weekend. I know you are too. And Congressman, appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.